Hi, everyone. First of all, I would like to begin by acknowledging that we here at StFX, where I am currently located, are in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. I am really excited to show you my classroom today. I guess just like everyone, we worked really hard through the summer, taking lots of different continuing education courses throughout the summer to be ready for the fall. I actually taught this in person last year, and I already wanted to make quite a few changes to the course. It was my first time teaching it. It's a brand new program, Bachelor of Art and Science in Climate and Environment. And it's a second year class, and primarily all of the students that take it, partly it's a core course for the climate change students, so the climate and environment students, that's CLEN. And they primarily take all science courses in their first year, and it's cross-listed with Development Studies 203. So it's really kind of tricky, actually. In my first year, I kind of tried to figure out how I could really engage lots of people, because everyone there, I had students from across the board. I have students who are climate change students who second year only took science, and then I have development studies from second, third, fourth year. I have poli-sci, health, aquatics resources, business, just across the board. And so it made it really kind of tricky for me as far as delivering material that is really, some people know a lot about, and then other people don't know very much. So I actually got some really great advice from Angie Colin, who advised me. I talked to her quite a bit last year about the course, and she advised that, gave me lots of great advice, but one of the things that she said was getting the students together and getting them to learn from each other in the beginning. And I did that with this online course. That was kind of the first thing that I did, and it also showed that climate change impacts everybody, and they already know, and it's already impacting their lives. So whether or not they formally know it or not. So I'm just thought that I'd go through, I'm going to do a screen share here and show you my classroom and talk through it. And also, if you have any ideas on how I can make my course better, I'd really appreciate any kind of feedback you can give me, or tips that work for you. Okay, I'm going to try to share this now. I think I'm sharing my screen.
Yep, you can see what appears to be your syllabus, so go for it.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so this is my course syllabus. I don't know what I was thinking when I named this class. I actually want to rename it to climate change and development, because this, I don't know. Look at the title. It's like very bad academic paper title or something, but anyway, that's what it is. And I teach this on Wednesday nights from 5:15 to 8 p.m. Online. So I really have been trying to make it engaging, and like short of juggling for everybody. I've been pulling out all the stops. So basically, the climate crisis, it's the greatest challenge for humans, right? This is and I essentially look at climate from a human perspective. So how climate is impacting human beings, how it's impacting people of all gender, race, and from different socioeconomic backgrounds. And it will impact people differently. So as we see from COVID shows that not everyone is being impacted by COVID the same, right? We see the people who are in the front lines, and it's elderly, people with compromised immune systems, people of color, people of lower socioeconomic status, those are the people that are being impacted the most, while other people are able to, although, have the resources to help themselves through it. And so the same is with the climate crisis. If we look at what happened in New Orleans, it was people of color, people who lived in poverty, who were the most impacted and who weren't even able to move back to New Orleans after development was done to make the community safe again. So because then the cost of land became too high and they were priced out of their home community. So these are the kinds of things that we talk about throughout the class. So the learning objective, the course focuses on interventions, and we talk about global policies and community-led actions. So the learning objective, students will gain a better understanding of the worldwide impacts of climate change, how it impacts people at a community level, and how citizen-led action can lead to positive change. I didn't give them a textbook, but I do give weekly readings. So the weekly topics, I think I'm going to scoot over to my Moodle page. So this is the Moodle page, and then I'll show you the different topics. So just starting off, this is just an area where I give them notices, whatever, reminders to do their assignments and whatnot, little tips about things. Usually what I like to do is, if a student contacts me with a question, I do have an area on here where they can ask any question, and that way their question gets shared amongst everyone, but they tend to just email me directly. So I like to then, after I give a student a tip on something, I like to then go on to Moodle and let all the other students know, just to be fair. Community of learning, I put this in here because I thought it would be a good idea, but as you can see, I've only, no one made any posts. I wanted any students to find out information about anything to do with climate, any interesting article or video or something, they could post it here, but they didn't do that. But, I told them about a conference that was coming up. Careers in climate change, I put this on here. I'm going to fill more in here, but for example, a lot of people don't know about the kinds of careers that they can go into within climate change. So I thought that I would tell them, I'm trying to share with them all the different things they can do with climate change, because you can go in and have an impact on climate from so many different fields. So they might not know that, you could go into law and look at climate change law in postgraduate studies, for example. So that's what I do there. Sharing how we feel about the material. The beginning of the course, it can be pretty depressing because I talk about the impacts and the status of the world, and it can get pretty tough. So I wanted them to be able to share how they feel, because they tell me during class, if I ask them how they're doing, I know that they can leave class pretty depressed. And so I thought this was a way of sharing how they're feeling about climate change. Again, they haven't really posted anything in there, but there is actually there are studies done on climate grief, and climate grief is very real. So a lot of young people are just overwhelmed with the magnitude of the climate crisis, and it can be really, really tough to deal with when you learn about the impacts and what's not being done about it. So I put that in there. Again, people haven't really talked that much about it. Group project. They have a group project, and I have been just writing. It makes up 25% of their mark. So I just give them information about their group project there. Like when a student contacts me and asks me a question, I usually go in there and post it in. Oh, communication between us. I had to do this one because my announcements from me just go out to them and they can't respond back. So if I ask them to respond to something, um, that's where it happens. They go in there and then they respond back to me. So here is course information, assignment submissions, and grading. So this is where they can ask any questions about the class, the course syllabus, and I'll show you actually how I grade the class after, but here's their rubric for their first essay, and this is again all the marking. I'll go into that. I do take attendance, and I take it every week, and they have to attend class. It's actually made into their participation. And usually I just, you know how you can see on online, like all the participants, I just take a snapshot with my iPhone of all the participants, and then I do the attendance later. This is information if they need to adjust something, like if they need special considerations because they have a learning disability or something else is going on, that's how they can, what we can do about it. I encourage them to find the appropriate resources. And so this was something that was sent out from our online committee at StFX, and I altered this for my class, but it's basically taking into consideration that during the pandemic, it's very uncertain and stressful, and I recognize the impact that it has on students and academic experiences. So this is what I promised them. I promised that I would clearly communicate with them and provide information, and I've really tried to be clear. I thought that I don't think that I was as clear in the past because I also teach at the Coady Institute, and that style of adult education at the Coady is more, it's different than teaching on campus to undergrads because it's more of a collaborative, let's decide together, you know, what's going to happen. So I would say to Coady participants, because they're all adults, well, our undergrad students are adults as well. I don't want to make it seem like they're not, but basically, if I'm teaching Coady, I would say something like, when do you think, you know, you would want to have your first assignment due? And I now know that with undergrad students, it's better to just be direct, just make those decisions for people. I can be, you know, I can be a little bit malleable around that, but I'm just trying to be a lot clearer and structured. And I'm also, I really care about students, and I really care about their mental health. For me, mental health is really, really important, and it's something that we don't see from, we can't see whether or not someone has mental health issues, but it does have an impact on performance. And I understand that life can be difficult. And so because when I was a student, it was hard for me. When I was in my undergraduate student, I had family problems. I had personal issues. My mom got breast cancer in my first year of university. So I'm very empathetic for students, and I really, I'm probably, some people say, oh, well, you know, they're probably lying to you. And I just think that's terrible. Well, because, anyway, we won't get into that. But my point is that I'm very understanding if students have issues, and I want them to, and I care, and I want them to be healthy and mentally healthy. So I try to put in structures to support their mental health. So anyway, these are some measures that I put into place for them during this time, and there's just different resources here. Health center, counseling, and whatnot. Okay, that went on a lot longer. Zoom, I tried Zoom. We're supposed to officially use Collaborate, but I had some students that couldn't really get on to Collaborate, and then So I thought that I'd try Zoom, and then I had other students that couldn't get onto Zoom. So, I was just like, I guess I should go back to Collaborate, because that is the one that's supported by the university and the one that we're supposed to use. So I ended up, I think I went on to Zoom for 2 classes, and then I just went back to Collaborate fully. So there's some information about the technology, tutorials on how to use the Collaborate, and tech support. So, pre-course engagement. So before the course started, I wanted them to read about the basics of climate change and a little article about the difference between weather and climate. And I asked them to come in here and introduce themselves to everyone. This was before the class started. So they just talked about their major, where they're from, a little bit about themselves. So starting to build that online community. And then here, I asked them what do you already know about climate change? So I asked them to think about how climate change is impacting their lives and what they see in their community. How do various forms of weather impact livelihoods and ways of living in your home province or country? I actually have people, one student who's taken the course from India, and I have quite a few people from the Caribbean who are taking the course too. What most concerns you about the climate changes that are occurring in your community? So I asked them to do this, and I asked them to actually, I was trying to get to people who are comfortable with writing. I could have actually gotten them to make a video too, but I asked them to draw something if they were able to draw something, or post a picture or something. So write plus post a picture. And I also responded to all of these. So here's a picture that one of the students wrote. She's really interested in food security and agriculture. So I tried to respond to each of them and take into account what they know. So that was really interesting because it allowed us to get to know each other before class started. So the class started on September 16th, and I started the class by just talking about what, assignments, gradings, expectations, and whatnot. But I actually, on Collaborate, I used the whiteboard, and I asked them to write down what their expectations are. And I also created a Google Doc that had people talk about what their expectations for the course, their expectations for themselves, and their expectations for me. And I did it too. And my expectation for myself was to be a fast grader. And I don't know, I'm doing better than I did in the past, but I don't really like grading that much, but I really am trying to do a good job with it and to put in a lot of effort and to use it as an opportunity for students to learn. And so I'm really putting in an effort this year with grading. So that's what we started with. Then the class, we started talking about complex systems thinking and resilience. And I started the class with that because in order to understand the climate crisis and the impact on people, it's important to understand the interconnections between multiple systems, whether it's a social system, economic, political, ecological, climate system. So really looking at how these different systems integrate. So I asked them to watch 3 videos about what is a complex system and have some additional resources here. I have this every week questions that you have on content. If there's something they don't understand, they can post a question here. And then every week I have this weekly discussion. So I asked them to, this is pretty much the format for every week. On this topic, I asked, discuss in your own opinion how a climate-related decision can, in a political system, can impact an economic system, or they had to pick one of the options. So if a political system makes a decision to improve the climate crisis, for example, what kind of an impact could that have on an economic system? So, and then their engagement with the online community, they have to read at least 5 other posts and then comment on 2 other posts. And that's standard. They have to do that every week. The way that I created this, and I'll talk about this more in the grading, is they have to, class is on Wednesday night. And so they have to read the material before Wednesday. And then by Saturday night, they have to make their first post. By Saturday night at midnight, they have to make 1 post. And then before class starts the following Wednesday, they have to comment on 2 other posts. So, so I think this is really great because it allows them to take what we've learned in class and talked about in class and apply it and think about it after class. And also a great opportunity for them to engage with each other. I've asked them in the beginning, I thought the posts were good, but then I noticed that I talked to them about how it can be enhanced by supplementing what their answers are with peer-reviewed evidence. So I've been trying to be really kind of strict on this throughout the course. I asked them their opinion, but I also told them that they can use peer-reviewed resources to enhance their statement. So they started doing that after I advised them to do that to improve their answers. So then week 2, we talked about climate change and humans throughout history. So we talked about how historical climate and environmental events impacted early humans. Talked about human effects or how humans evolved and how climate changes helped humans evolve, and then how what humans did as climate changed, which very often was migrate. And so that's really interesting because we later talk about the options that we have. And of course, not everybody can migrate, right? What do you do if you're living in an informal settlement or slum in Bangladesh and the country is, going to be covered in water in the not too far future? So just, we can't do that anymore. So we can't just migrate. Or if people do migrate, what will that mean for security, country security? How will political leaders cope with that? What kind of decisions will people make? Will they be open and welcoming and respond in a human way, or will we see the worst in humans? So how will we be impacted by by climate refugees and whatnot? So that's why we start to talk about here that yes, humans have been impacted by humans throughout history. Actually, I also show, I can't remember if I showed it in my first week or second week. I think it was the second week. I showed a video that shows the basics. I think, yeah, it was this class actually, I think. Anyway, I showed a video on climate science and what actually climate is. And I think it's really important, even though this is an arts-based class, it was probably about an hour-long lecture that one of my colleagues, Dr. Andrew McDougall, he's a climate scientist here at StFX, he did it for me for another course that I'm teaching on climate change. And it was really great because he's able to take really complex scientific facts and make it more understandable for just people who aren't specialists in that area. So I showed them a climate science, and I think it's really important to do this because, and some people say that you shouldn't because not everyone can understand the science, but I argue that everybody can understand science. It just needs to be explained in a particular way that that person can understand. The issue is that climate change, there's so many people who just don't believe in climate change, and everybody's, they think that they're an expert on it, and they don't really listen to the science. And as you know, as we all know, science has been attacked. All we have to do is just look at the number of people who are dying of COVID, who are still saying that they don't believe COVID exists. So I think that it's really important to talk about the science and climate change. And I combine this with, local knowledge, Indigenous knowledge. I think that's really important too. And I like to think about how the two can combine to further understand our understanding. What Albert Marshall actually talks about as two-eyed seeing. He's an elder from Eskizoni here in Nova Scotia. Okay. So I talk about climate change throughout history. And then I talk about fossil fuel addiction and consumption. So I talk about neoliberalism and fossil fuels and consumption. And I basically have to educate in order to understand inequality and why some countries are being impacted more than other countries. I really have to help people understand why there's such global inequality between countries. So why is the global south in the state that it's in, economically and otherwise? So I start the lecture by talking about essentially the debt crisis, structural adjustment, the rise of neoliberalism, because a lot of the students in their second year, like, they might not really understand what capitalism is or what neoliberalism is. So I talk to them, I educate them about like the oil crisis and the rise of neoliberalism, Thatcherism, all that movement, so that they understand what has happened and why the world is in the state that it's in. And I actually showed them a movie on this, and they loved. I got a lot of positive feedback about this class. What was the name of it? I can't remember the name of it right now because I don't know, I'm getting old. But it talks about Jamaica and the impact that structural adjustment has had on Jamaica. So I set that stage so that when they hear, like a country like Bangladesh or a African country is going to be severely impacted, and the people there, they understand the wider structural reasons why Ghana doesn't have the same resources to deal with the climate crisis as, say, England. So we talk about that, and again, the same kind of weekly discussions happen. What role does neoliberal capitalism play in the climate crisis? And then I talk about the starting to think about balancing people, planet, and profit. So these are pretty depressing topics, actually. And then we go on to talk about the impacts of climate change and inequality, and looking at how people of different classes, gender, race, are impacted by the climate crisis differently. Talk about violence against women, because there's studies that show that violence against women are increased due to the climate crisis. For example, women are responsible for domestic duties in the global south, for example. And say there's a drought, and women and girls also have to collect water. So with the drought, this means that they have to walk further and further to collect water. And that means that their lives are in danger for a longer period of time, because there's rape, there's being attacked, the farther that they have to travel to collect water. So, and then if there's no water, for example, then the husband gets home, there's no food, and then the wife says, I don't have any water, and violence against women increases. So we talk about those kinds of issues as well. So that's October 7th. And then, so I've set the stage, which is pretty bleak, actually. So global inequality, this consumption, neoliberal capitalism, how it's just this perpetuating machine that continues to create massive global problems, from a climate perspective and also from a social justice perspective because of people being impacted differently. So then I start to talk about the global environmental policies that have been created. And I start from the very beginning of the very first climate change policies. And so this is going back like 40 or 50 years when the very first policies were created. And then I teach them about what the UNFCCC is, what COPs are, Conference of the Parties, how the United Nations works, how the Paris Agreement, and I start to talk to them about how global environmental policies are designed to take into consideration the fact that we in the global north have caused the problem and the people in the global south are paying for it, essentially. So I start to talk to them about climate finance. So there's something called the Green Climate Fund, where rich countries put money into this, and it's supposed to go to countries in the global south that are most impacted by climate. And then we talk about sticky points. For example, just different issues that different countries had throughout the climate negotiations. So, how China would say, well, China and India basically went to the rich country, the global north, and said, well, you were able to develop your economy by generating all these fossil fuels, and you became a rich nation, and now you're trying to tell us that we're not allowed to do that because the mistake you made. So we do these. So I've done a lot of group work around this. Like, I think what I did was I put different groups and I called them different countries. So there were some people like from Germany, others from Haiti, and around the climate negotiations at the global level, at the big conferences, there's different groups come together if they have particular interests. So the small island development states, they work together. Different countries work together because they have common issues that they have when it comes to climate. So coming together like that, it's something like the Maple League. They're stronger. They're able to negotiate more powerfully. And so throughout this process, I think I did 1 week where just different groups were in different countries, and then I put them together as this collective group, and then we went through kind of a mock negotiation. So that was pretty fun. And so this was talking about at the global level, what's happening as far as global environmental policies. But then, and that can be kind of depressing too, because sometimes it feels like there's not much being done, but a lot of money and a lot of air pollution being spent to come up with a solution. So then I move into cities because there's a lot of evidence that, and a lot of people say that the climate crisis will be solved at the city level. And a lot of cities like the C40 group that's some of the biggest cities in the world, the mayors of the world come together and have basically said, we have to make change at the city level, and regardless of what happens at a national level. And so I introduced them to different organizations like ICLEI. ICLEI is a global organization of municipalities where different municipalities are working together to come up with more sustainable solutions for their cities. So I'm trying to show at this point, a little bit of a turning point. It's bad. Yes, it's really bad, but this is some of the things that people are doing to make things better. And so before this, I was doing a lot of like group work and whatnot. And then I decided to get different people to come into my class. So a friend of mine is the director of a sustainable infrastructure. It's like an NGO in Toronto, but it's a global organization on sustainable infrastructure. And basically, they work with different cities to create more sustainable green infrastructure in building. So Melissa came and talked to the class, and then I put them, I asked if they had any questions. Some people had questions for her, but they weren't really saying much. So then I put them into groups, and I asked them to come up, each group to come up with a question to ask Melissa. And then I also, because she's young and she's just got tons of energy and passion. And so some of the questions were like, what do we do? How do we cope with this massive climate problem we have? And how do you get such passion to keep going when it's really, it's really a bad, bleak situation? And so just even questions about her career, what keeps her going, what she's passionate about, and also about the content. Mitigation. So mitigation, this is, again, I'm starting to move into solutions now. So mitigation are, in the climate lingo, is basically methods of preventing greenhouse gases from going into the Earth's atmosphere. So windmills, solar, electric cars, these kinds of things are all forms of mitigation. And I wanted to try to introduce them to how mitigation and adaptation are totally different things. Mitigation means you're just trying to prevent the greenhouse gases from going into the atmosphere, and you're not dealing with the problems with it. Well, although some mitigation things can also be adaptation, but something like planting trees could be both, I guess, because mitigation, that the trees are taking the greenhouse gases out of the air. Anyway, then we talked about the politics, though, of mitigation, and about how sometimes, for example, you think that something is a positive measure, but there's negative consequences for either local communities or states. So that's what Swatek et al. Calls the boomerang effect. So you make a decision and you think it's going to be good for the climate, but then it's bad because it causes financial problems for people in the local community, for example. And then I started talking about adaptation and vulnerability. And in this class, there's a woman who, it was really great because she's a fairly new grad and from University of Waterloo. And so that's where I did my PhD and my master's. And so she came into my class because she's responsible for developing adaptation plans. It's a fairly new position for the city of Vaughan and the city of Milton in Ontario. This is her second position. And so she was able to talk about that planning process from community consultation. So adaptation is basically the impacts, they've already happened, and so how people can adapt to what's already happened. So flooding, coastal erosion, for example, like maintaining the coastline, and that would be a form of adaptation. So flooding, the climate's already, and you have to have both, right? But so anyway, she came in and did this presentation, but what was really cool about her is I got her to talk to the students about something she did when she was an undergrad. She actually contacted she and a bunch of friends contacted a country, a small island development state, I forget which one, to see if they needed extra help for the Paris Agreement, for COP21 in Paris. And that country actually invited them to be part of their delegation, because a lot of smaller countries, they're allowed to bring a lot of people, but they don't have a lot of people. So they are actually looking for people to go along with their delegation to help them by taking notes, by being, just listening and reporting back to the officials as from that country. So it was really, really amazing because she was right there when all the presidents and the prime ministers and everyone was doing the negotiations for the Paris Agreement as part of the small island development state. And literally, like, I asked her, tell the students about how you were able to do that. And she said, well, I went online and I saw their environment department and I saw an email and I contacted them. Like, that was it. So I wanted to show the students that there's lots of opportunities to become engaged, and it's a big world out there, so that they can attend these global meetings that I've had the chance to do, and others. And how do you become part of these discussions? You just start getting engaged and you reach out to people. So I start to talk about that kind of thing with them. Wednesday, no class, Remembrance Day. Last night I was supposed to talk about social movements and climate justice, but I'm changing this around a bit. November the 11th, I actually didn't know that it was Remembrance Day, although I should have known. That was supposed to be Indigenous knowledge. So anyway, I canceled the class. But last night, I'm doing a project in the Arctic, and we have community champions that are working with us as part of a team to come up with community-based solutions to mitigation in northern Indigenous communities. So I had two of our champions speak last night to the class, and it went so well. It was just like knocked it out of the park. Calvin Wakwan from Fort Chipewyan in northern Alberta, he would just and it was really cool because he was responsible for building the largest solar farm in Canada in a remote area. And last night was the official kickoff ceremony. So it started at 5 o'clock. My class starts at 5:15, but I just put it on in the background. So as students were coming in, they started to watch the ceremony, and then he joined the class and gave a presentation about how it all happened. And it was just so great because he's really inspiring. And we only hear about like the negative part of what's wrong in northern Indigenous communities, and this just proves that there's so many right things going on, and there's so many wonderful things that people are doing, and people are smart and bright and just making things happen. So the students they were really inspired, which made me feel good because I do a check-in with them, like, put in emoticon, how are you feeling? Or I ask them how they're feeling, and they're all stressed, right? So this was a way, and he's had like a remarkable life, like on a personal level, and he shares that with them about what made him really commit to his culture and making, and the climate crisis and whatnot. So anyway, next week they do their group presentations, and I just have that'll be the whole class. It's like 20 minutes, so 15 minutes, I think, per presentation, and then 5-minute questions, And then final week, December 2nd, moving toward a low carbon just future. So I'll probably talk, for that one, I told them I'm going to talk more about social movements. So how they can continue to be engaged and what they can do and what's out there as far as being active to combat the climate crisis. So for me, I guess, how am I doing for time? I better hurry up because he might want to ask me questions. So I'll just talk to you quickly about my evaluation. I got them to do one major paper, and it's worth 50%. But it's broken down into 3 different steps. So the first step is they provide a title for their paper, a thesis statement, list 10 academic sources, and write about why 3 of those sources are essential for their paper. And this is like this making sure, and I told them, I'm working with you to be able to come up with a really good product at the end. So if they didn't do anything right, I sent it back to them and I asked them to do it again. And a lot of them, especially, if business students, science students that haven't written a paper, they didn't know what an academic source was, or they didn't know how to cite it properly, didn't know how to write a thesis statement. So I worked really hard with them because I felt like they need to know for other classes. And I said to them, I'm trying to work with you. And if in the future, if you're in your third year and you don't know how to do a proper citation, you're going to lose marks. So why don't you have to do it anyway. Why don't we work together to do it properly so you learn, so you're not causing more problems for yourself. Also, after reading these, I noticed that the students really needed to learn how to use the library. So I asked the librarian to come into my class and talk about the resources that are available to the students. Step 2, that is when they refine their title and thesis statement. They provide a topic heading. So I asked them to look at peer-reviewed articles and start to structure their paper and refine their bibliography and write a little bit underneath each heading about what is going to be there and why it would be there. And then the third is their paper. And so hopefully they're going to present something that they're really proud of. And I asked them to write about any issue that concerned them, actually. So we were able to talk about what they wanted to do throughout the course. So the group presentations, that takes place next week. Like I said, it's worth 25%, and class participation is 30%. So 10% comes from them basically participating and showing up every week. That's why I take attendance. Then 20% is made up of their comments and replies in the weekly discussion forum on Moodle. So there's a whole big thing here, but basically I show them how I'm going to mark them about this, minimum requirements and guidelines for the discussion forum, and then I go over, so at the very end, this is how I'm going to mark them. There's a whole formula here about their discussion forums. Again, I'm just trying to keep it really clear so that they understand why they get the marks that they're getting, because I don't think I did a very good job at that in my earlier days. And so now I'll show you. I had no idea that I could actually, I fill an hour talking about my class. Okay, and then, yeah, the rubric for their paper, I'll give them this at the end. The way I mark blindly, so what I do is when I don't want to know who they are, I don't want to know who a student is when I'm marking their paper. So I just ask them to put their student number on their paper, and I name their file, like of their assignment, their student number, and then I have a folder, and I just see all of the student numbers, and then I go into it and mark, and their names aren't there, it's just all of their student numbers, and I mark it, and then I go and I mark them all, and then I look through it and I mark them again, and then I go into our system to find out who the person is that lines up to the student number. And it's really interesting how that happens, because of course, like, I'm not going to remember one number to the, after I see the number first, I'm not going to remember that number in November. So it's really interesting to see how the marking lines up. Anyway, it's just a little geek factor for you. So anyway, I'm going to stop now in case we want to have a discussion. I didn't realize that I could talk so long about this. So how about we have a conversation about it?